The position of Louise Arbour on this Pan-Arab Rights Charter is truly a time for anger, constructive anger. We ought to let our politicians know. www.unwatch.org is the site of a remarkable organization that Hillel Neuer, a native Montrealer, has headed for some years, executive director for some years. Hillel, welcome. Thanks for joining us so late in Geneva.
It's my pleasure to be here as always, Beryl.
You have faced the hypocrisy of the UN Human Rights Council and the UN organizations in Geneva for so long, so bravely, so boldly. I remember you speaking by telephone hookup to our conference on Darfur, the Institute for Public Affairs conference on Darfur. You've expended so much passion and been frustrated so many times with many things, and particularly with Louise Arbour's performance. How does this rate on the hypocrisy scale over there in Geneva?
Well, I have to tell you, we're deeply concerned, particularly at the timing of this latest episode. We're coming up to a very difficult period known as the Durban Review Conference. As you're well aware, it's meant to be a world conference against racism. The first episode was held in 2001. It turned into a hate fest of anti-Semitism, and the conference was hijacked in so many ways and turned into a litany of accusations against the West, a distortion of the true principles of anti-racism in so many ways. And we're going to see a redux, a sequel of that, and it's chaired by Libya. The first meeting will be held in April. And, of course, Louise Arbour is the Secretary General of this conference, and so she holds a particularly important position at this time. And those of us in the human rights community who are concerned about the hijacking of human rights from countries such as Libya, with Iran as vice chair, Cuba as vice chair, countries that are among the most notorious serial human rights violators in the world. And a position that is held by Louise Arbour at this conference has the potential to stand as a check and as a counter, as a filter to those who would hijack the language and idea of human rights for their nefarious ends, to take, as you said, the founding noble principles of the UN and twist them in an Orwellian fashion, turn war into peace and peace into war. And this latest event does not bode well. I'd say it's hardly reassuring, and so it ranks rather high, particularly at this time in our Richter scale.
The government of Stephen Harper, of course, has pulled Canada out of Durban. Jason Kenney has called it a joke, a circus, and something that's gone completely off the rails. Yet, we have to talk about this. We have to talk about this split in this country. We know that the Liberal Party has offered Louise Arbour her choice of seats. She's apparently rejected them. She has no interest in it. What drives this woman?
Well, we only look at actions. That's all that we measure, and that's all that counts, are actions, public actions. And this latest action is deeply disturbing, Beryl, and I'll tell you why. You've talked about it already yourself, but, in 2004, Secretary General, as he then was, Kofi Annan, discussed anti-Semitism, and actually a very bold speech in June 2004. He talked about the UN's own questionable record on anti-Semitism, and he cited the only instance that he cited in this aspect is what he called an especially unfortunate action when the UN, in a Soviet Arab initiative in 1975, reached its nadir when it adopted the infamous Zionism is Racism resolution, which in 1991 was repealed thanks to Western states such as Canada, United States, and others. This document, the Arab Charter on Human Rights, has, lest our readers be confused, has nothing in common with our document, the Canadian Charter of Human Rights, which is something we can be proud of. This is a document that, unfortunately, no human rights activist can be proud of. Instead of calling for peace and coexistence, it calls for frankly, destruction of Israel. It calls Zionism, which is the movement for the right of the Jewish people to self-determination. It calls that a threat to world peace. It says it's against human rights. It says it's against human dignity. It says it equates it with racism, and it says we have to expend all efforts to eliminate it. That's in the Arab Charter on Human Rights. It's there in the preamble. It's there in Article 3. It's a prominent part of the Charter. In fact, when Syria signed this charter, these words were hardly, marginal rhetoric. On the contrary, they were material. Syria's news agency cited it expressly. It said, we're signing this document, and here's what's in it. And it was the attacks on Zionism that they cited. This is an anti-Semitic document playing on classically anti-Semitic themes. Now, the question is, I have to tell you that as critical as we may be of Ms. Arbour, we trust that she was not aware of what was in that document. That is our assumption. Others may not share that.
Was not aware or did not want to be aware? And I asked that for a reason, but answer that, and then I'll ask you for the reason in a moment.
Oh, you know, we're giving her, we choose to give her the benefit of the doubt. Now, there were 6 editorials in Canada over the weekend: Calgary Herald, Winnipeg Free Press, National Post, Montreal Gazette, and other places that didn't give her that benefit of the doubt. We do. We trust she was not aware of it. But we do assume that her office did know about it. Senior people in the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights were very aware of what was in that. Indeed, in the clarification, the so-called clarification that was issued, they admit, the High Commissioner admits that they were aware of major problems in the text, not only against Zionism, but against women's rights, against children's rights, and that they communicated them to the drafters. I'm not aware of these communications, but that is the claim, that they were aware of these. So someone in her office was well aware of what was in that document and gave it to her. And, you know, again, we assume that she was not aware and that she receives many statements to sign, as many high officials do, and that she signed it. And so our question is, who did it? Who gave her that document? Now, Louise Arbour, the High Commissioner of Human Rights, speaks all the time, as she is entitled to, of individual responsibility, of accountability, of action against what she calls a culture of impunity. And so the question is, and today we call upon High Commissioner Louise Arbour to set an example, to be the first in the world, to set an example of the principles that she proclaims, of individual responsibility, of accountability, of opposition to a culture of impunity. And we ask who in her office was responsible for issuing that anti-Semitic text. Someone has to be held responsible. And a question was asked to the spokesman for the Secretary General on this issue, and they dodged the question. And so I think Canadians today, who have great expectations of Louise Arbour, have the right and the obligation to ask her who, if it wasn't her, someone in her office has got to take responsibility and to draw the conclusions.
Hillel Neuer, please stay with us, because when you come back, I want to address the universal implications of Arbour's actions or inactions, because the document, the Arab document, is more than about Israel, though of course it is an anti-Semitic tract to begin with. It calls for the elimination of the Jewish state, or calls for the elimination of the democratic state of Israel. But more than that, I want to share with you something that happened with Louise Arbour and other human rights campaigns that she has failed to be involved in. We'll be right back with Hillel Neuer, Executive Director of UN Watch. We're talking to Hillel Neuer, Executive Director of UN Watch from Geneva, www.unwatch.org. Hillel, before the break, I said I wanted to turn this discussion a little bit into a larger tableau. This Pan-Arab Rights Charter, though it, of course, is aimed at the elimination of Israel, is also an attack on any nation in the West, of course. Now, here's the reason I asked you the question about Louise Arbour and what drives this woman. We at the Institute of Public Affairs are very involved with Nazanin Afshinjan, former Miss World Canada turned human rights activist, in her campaign to free Nazanin Fatehi, this poor 17-year-old girl at the time who was sentenced to death in Iran for stabbing the man who was raping her. Nazanin Afshinjan collected 300,000 plus names on a worldwide petition. It took 6 months for Louise Arbour to see her, and she did that grudgingly, and after that, it was just basically business as usual. That's what I meant. What drives this woman? Why is she there? What human rights does she seek to propound?
Well, we think that Louise Arbour, on a number of issues, has spoken out, and we certainly are not condemning her entire record. We have issues that we've raised a number of times. We were deeply concerned. You mentioned Iran, that she did go to Iran, that she sat there before Ahmadinejad as he delivered, as his regime delivered several speeches, and she donned the dress that is enforced in the Iranian regime. We thought that was unnecessary. Other human rights activists have gone to Saudi Arabia and met with ministers without feeling the need to submit themselves in that way. And we thought that was sort of a symbolic, if you will, some of the problems that we see at the United Nations, where rather than stand up to such blatant contraventions to universal human rights, the kind of human rights and freedoms that we hold dear in Canada, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of political assembly, and the like, and equality of women, we see too often at the United Nations that there is this subversion of values that allows such things as the Arab Charter of Human Rights to be celebrated by the United Nations, which really is an entire subversion of everything that Eleanor Roosevelt stood for, everything that Rene Cassin stood for. And
Hillel, we're just coming up against.
I remember from McGill University.
Hillel, we're just coming up against a news break.